Good Monday afternoon. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our quick discussion I'm going to do here to talk about what's going to be a very active and high impactful weather pattern setting up across the United States, anywhere from severe weather to heavy snow, blizzard conditions, all the way up to Arctic cold air to impact the United States. A lot to impact this afternoon. I thank you so much for joining me. Let's get started really quickly. Taking a look at the weather homepage. This is the National Weather Service homepage, and you could see it's already getting started. We have winter storm warnings in effect for portions of the high Midwestern plains, and blizzard warnings in effect too, including places such as northern Texas as well could get accumulating snow, blowing winds. And this is just the first system that we're tracking that'll be really a big problem for tomorrow and heading into Wednesday. And these impacts will eventually spread eastward as well, especially with the gusty winds. And there's also the severe weather threat as well. That is also a big portion, another factor, another player into this big weather event. There are many players to go over, and I'll show you that in just a moment. But tornado watch is in effect, and I think there's also an active tornado warning over Texas as well. And let's start off with that, the severe weather threat. This is the day one outlook. There are already tornado watches in effect, and it's just only going to get more active from here on out. A marginal risk in effect for basically most of the southeastern, south central coast, Gulf Coast, and right along the Gulf Coast regions as well. An enhanced risk is up in place, and there's also going to be the risk of not only severe weather but tornadoes as well. They even have up to a 10% chance with a hatched area, denoting the possibility that we could be looking at pretty significant tornadoes within this region as well. And there's also wind and elevated hail chances too. And this continues into day two. Once this system begins to move to the east, the enhanced risk expands now over Florida and portions of the southeast. Wind will be the big threat, as well as tornadoes to watch out for. But it's really going to be about the flooding rain and the high gusty winds that'll stretch not only from the southeast, that's where we'll see the worst, especially accompanied where we'll probably see the biggest tornado threat to come out of it. But these gusty winds and these flooding excessive rainfall potentials are going to extend all the way up the East Coast, and I'll show you that in just a moment. But let's get to the day three outlook. Gets quiet for Thursday, but Friday we're right back to it. This is our second system, and that also brings severe weather potentially, at least from that map, looks already like a moderate, I'd say not a moderate risk, but an enhanced risk possible. Once again, anywhere from a slight to enhanced risk at least, to be released once again for the southeast. But that's another system we'll go over in just a moment. But taking a live look at the satellite over the United States, this is our system right now, the northern tier. Lots of deep convection, especially over the northern tier, and that's one of the themes that will be associated with this and the next system that's going to move through over the next few days. There will be a lot of moisture associated with both of these storms. That's going to lead to heavy rain and excessive rainfalls, flash flooding potential along the entire East Coast and also the southeastern United States, where that heavy, that strong, that really dense Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean moisture that'll be drawn into both of these systems will also play into severe weather threats like we're seeing right now and tomorrow as well, and probably later this week as well. And on the northern fronts, where there will be colder air, that high moisture content will mix with that colder air and potentially cause some pretty significant snow totals along the high plains and upper Midwestern states. So there's a lot of activity going on, and it's already getting started, especially by these deep convective bursts over the southeast and south central United States, especially over Louisiana right now. This is going to move east, and we'll probably see a pretty significant severe weather outbreak tonight. And I'll show you on the radar right now, lots of thunderstorms going on, especially these more discrete storms. And when it comes to tracking severe weather specifically, these kind of discrete thunderstorm cells that you see here, they're a lot more tightly packed together. These are the ones that we're especially going to watch for when it comes to the development of tornadoes and whatnot, and supercell activity as well. So that's something we'll be monitoring too, and that's just one piece of the puzzle associated with this. And let's go take a look at that. This is the temperature anomalies, and that's something we'll actually revisit in a short while. But I want to show you really quickly. Gotta just load this again. Sometimes, you know, when you're in a rush, you just gotta prepare for things, but hey, at least I have this right now. The 12Z GFS, I'm not going over the 18C because that is not fully loaded yet, but I wanted to show you the 12Z. I mean, they generally show relatively the same things, but here it is 6 hours from now. This is right now developing over the United States. Strong low pressure beginning to form over the Texas, Oklahoma area, 992 millibars. And watch as we move out into time. This is 24 hours out from now. One thing to notice, look at all these, look at the direction of the wind, drawing in a lot of moisture from the southeast. You can see that very reflected in the precipitation rate that is being forecasted by the GFS, probably heavy excessive rainfall, gusty winds as well. And you could also take a look at the gusty winds by these isobars here. These lines, these are what these are called, isobars. When you see those tight and close together, that is an indication of potentially strong gusty winds that'll be associated with these. And this extends all the way up the east coast, even extends into the northern fronts. I mean, just look at that field of that moisture, and I can even show you here on the relative humidity. I'm going to go to that right now. Actually, it's not here, it's actually preset, but here it is, the relative humidity. And you know that this system has a lot of moisture. I mean, just look at it, 979 millibars, such a huge, massive kind of encompassing sort of system, and it draws in a lot of moisture, especially from the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. A lot of moisture that's going to fall in the northeast, and this will kind of play into another factor here with the rainfall threat, because we've had just recently a significant snowfall event for portions of the interior northeast and New England areas. That's going to wash away with this rain, but because it's snow, and snow is still a type of precipitation, when that snow melts, that's going to lead to even more rain and probably an increased flash flooding risk. So that is something to keep in mind as well. Lots of rain associated with this. 979, 976 millibar load as it deepens over the Great Lakes, and that precipitation field stretches into the northern tiers of the United States too. And let's go back to the precipitation sort of outlook by the GFS, and we can definitely see that here. That feeds into the snowstorm. That'll probably be a big situation for portions of the Midwestern states, probably snow totals over a foot in some areas, and when it's all said and done by the end of this week, probably over 2 feet in many places, over 2 feet even possible in many places along the Midwestern states, especially by the Great Lakes regions. Very significant storm indeed. So that storm moves out. Very potent storm, both sub 980s, and don't want to bring that up, not the model sounding, but bottom line, for 48 hours, especially when the impacts will be biggest along the East Coast. Very tight isobars, so probably very gusty winds. And I'll even take a look at the 850 millibar wind and height. This is just 850 millibar. What does that mean? Basically just looking at winds in the upper atmosphere, not the upper atmosphere, but taking a look at the winds just a few thousand feet up above the surface. And look at that, wind gusts and winds values being recorded just a few thousand feet above the atmosphere already. 64, this is in knots by the way, so that means the actual winds in miles an hour, the 64 knots. If you're a hurricane tracker, you know that that is 74. That's basically hurricane force winds just a few thousand feet above the surface. And if we're able to get a lot of deep convection, especially once this system moves eastward and this mixes down, that we're easily looking at potential wind gusts anywhere from 40 to 50, maybe even 60 miles an hour in some places in the Northeast and up and down the entire East Coast. So that system moves out. 979 millibars, very potent system, but we're not done yet. Look back to the west, and there we have it, another developing system. This is Thursday into Friday. This develops into another significant system too, And by the way, when it comes to the snow threat, this will probably be even more significant in its snow potential. I mean, just look at that. My goodness, those deep blues in here. Once again, very gusty winds too. And this one even looks like a stronger system, pressure down to the 970s. And especially for a system like this over land, that is very strong. And that definitely will help bring in a lot of moisture from the Gulf too. Probably going to see repeated factor with severe weather across the southeast, but this especially focuses a lot more on the snow totals. And I'll actually show that really quickly. Let's go to the precipitation and the total snowfall. Some places, especially once we move past this system, look at that. 126 hours, this is already by early Sunday. Snow totals widespread through the northern United States, and that even looks like Chicago's in it too. Snow totals easily up to 2 feet in some areas. Very impactful system. And when it comes to the rain, that's another big situation that we're watching along the East Coast as well. And I mean, you could just see it. Let's go back to the models here. You could just see it. Very gusty winds associated with this, and a lot of winds, especially from the southeast. So this will have a direct moisture connection from the south, and that's just going to pummel precipitation, rain and snow into the United States with both of these systems that'll develop. And then once this moves by, once this moves past, we're now into Sunday, and you notice where the wind shift in the atmosphere changes, these isobars, especially in the back end of the system. We start seeing winds move out of the northeast, out of the northwest, and you notice very strong gusty winds potentially with this as well. This is a very large and significant system too, 969 millibars over southern Canada. And this is where it leads to the second part of this whole weather disaster equation. I don't know what else to call it, but it's going to be pretty messy. This leads to the second part of the weather pattern, and that is the cold, brutally cold Arctic air for some. And so I'm actually really quickly going to load the GEFS to kind of show this part. And I'm going to really quickly draw your attention. This is the 500 millibar map now. This is looking at, we're a little bit further up in the atmosphere now. We're around the mid-levels. But this still generally does give an idea of what the general pattern will be. So this is still pretty useful to look at. So we're here now at 12Z on the GEFS. And as we move it out into time, this is 114 hours out. And this is by the time our system is already moving by. This is by the time our second system moves through. Watch in particular for two areas that I want you to pay close attention to. Obviously, one, this huge trough, this huge blue area along the United States. These are lower heights in the United States. This represents, we'll probably see a huge upper level system that'll help usher in a lot of cold air. And pay attention to these red and these purples. This represents tremendous blocking that'll set up in the northern regions of North America. And this will allow, especially once this system moves through, this will set up and allow the jet stream to set up in a way that we're able to usher in almost a direct connection from the Pacific Northwest down into the United States, brutally Arctic cold air. And I'll even show you here on some of these values, the 2-meter temperature anomaly. Here we go. This is it by the GEFS. Just look at some of these values you see here. This is already going out to 168 hours. This is by next Monday. Take a look at all these purples and these, even some of these pinks here, even when we go further up in time into the frame. This is later this weekend. This is Sunday. Look at these values. Some of them probably nearing the top end or the bottom end in this case of the scale, probably. And this is, by the way, in Celsius. So in Fahrenheit, this is probably upwards here in some areas, seeing 40 degrees Fahrenheit below their average. That is probably for many temperatures in the negatives, in real actual surface temperatures. And I can only imagine, especially with gusty winds, probably, especially because this will produce a huge pressure gradient once this system moves through. The second system for the weekend, that's going to be a significant storm, very strong. That'll produce a significant pressure gradient. So that'll probably mean strong gusty winds and very brutal wind chills for many in the United States. And this also does linger too. This is not only going to be a few day event, this will probably last for several weeks. This is already Wednesday and into Thursday of next week, January 18th. Look at that. The cold air is still there. Multiple days on end, we'll probably see very, very cold, frigid conditions. And it also stretches east as well. It's not going to be as bad for people in the eastern half of the United States, but this cold air will spread. Eventually, the pattern will allow for this colder air to get to the east. And really quickly, I actually do want to mention the third part, sort of, to this. I know there's another part. Yeah, so much going on, especially over the next few weeks. But really quickly, do want to mention this high latitude bridging. This is what we also call the NAO, by the way, the North Atlantic Oscillation, basically meaning when we have higher pressures over Greenland, over the northern portions of the northern hemisphere, North America, and we have a lower pressure here. This is in the subtropical Atlantic. This means we're in a negative state of the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation. These values, these high blocking values, do weaken over time. And as we get into portions of later next week, you do notice this ridge does sort of dissipate. And it's because of this, there is a lot of talk in the weather community, maybe, and you do notice one thing, this does weaken, and number two, we start seeing a bunch of these lower heights, these negative anomalies begin to show up in the 500 millibar height pattern in the eastern United States. And people are saying this could lead to a more stormy pattern to set up that could favor the East Coast, and maybe it could be wintry. Just maybe could it be more wintry for us than just the plain rain that we've been seeing. I would certainly imagine, at least in my opinion, if you were to personally ask me for my opinion, I would say it's possible. I mean, the cold air will definitely be in place. I mean, we're going to have cold air that will be stretching across the entire United States. So unlike especially these past few systems, because we've been getting storms that would try, especially with this most recent event, there was not a lot of cold air, especially not enough to be able to mix to the coastline. So that's why we mostly saw most of the snow just inland of the coast. But there will be a lot more cold air this time around, and the pattern does set up in a favorable way because this negative NAO pattern that we're in does begin to dissolve. And usually climatology wise, or historically, there is a historical precedence, I should say, when we do have this transition period in the Atlantic, that does sometimes tend to favor more winter weather and winter storm type setups along the East Coast. And it is January, so I mean, we are in that time period where things are more favorable. But we got to take it one step at a time. I mean, we're still dealing with the rainfall. This is for tomorrow, by the way. This is by the Weather Prediction Center. Rainfall, I'm just going to reiterate, it's going to be a huge factor of this, not just the snow, but the rainfall as well, especially for portions along the Northeast. We've been getting hammered with rain, significant rain systems, basically since the fall, and it's just not going to let up. Moderate risk, a large area, in fact, where there's a potential for moderate excessive rainfall across the Northeast. It stretches anywhere from Connecticut all the way down to Virginia, and even some patches in the Carolinas, and I would imagine this could probably expand as well. And this is for the system that'll develop tonight, that is developing right now, and will really peak tomorrow. And then this is for the weekend system. Already, the Weather Prediction Center releasing an excessive rainfall outlook potential for there as well. Marginal risk now and a slight risk for portions of the more interior Northeast, but I'd imagine these chances will probably go up as well too once we head closer in time to the weekend. And just really quickly, just to sum it up, this is the 168-hour rainfall by the Weather Prediction Center, and just look at how the eastern half of the United States really lights up. Lots of rainfall, lots of flash flooding, heavy rains. And remember, when we do talk about the tropics and we talk about hurricanes, we always mention how rainfall, yes, the wind is a factor, and the wind in this event particular will also be a factor, but the rain is still a factor and is usually, and I always like to mention, it's almost always the biggest killer and the biggest damage causer when it comes to storms and hurricanes. So that is something to keep in mind. And yes, if you're not already noticed, if you're new to my channel, I do post mostly hurricane content, hurricane tracking content, which is like I do sometimes really like to make comparisons to hurricane and tropical weather. But in the end, if you really look at it, they're all the same in one, basically. They're all different kind of systems, but in general they could all bring similar impacts, similar heavy rain, gusty winds, and this is probably what we'll see developing in the east right now. So now's a good time. If you're new, please, I would suggest subscribe. We have fun, we also like tracking, and I definitely will try to post more, especially before the weekend, when I do usually post my usual weekly videos. I like to do weekly tropical and so hurricane tropics kind of update videos and whatnot. You probably get the picture. Those usually come out Saturday, and I usually do them every Saturday. So if you're new and you're interested in those, I would definitely especially suggest subscribing to see that. But a lot of weather coming up, and I'm going to be honest, I do not think that this is the end. This is probably just the beginning, especially after us getting off to a really active start, coming off of a really quiet finish, I should say, to the previous year. And we still got severe weather season to contend with. That's coming up in the spring, and I cannot even imagine how hurricane season will be for the United States as well. Probably a repeat of disaster like we're seeing right now, basically. Just a lot of active weather coming up, but there's always some sort of light, if you will, light at the end of the tunnel, and that is you could always be prepared no matter what. There are so many resources out there, so I definitely suggest you look into them. And hey, look into subscribing as me as well. I hopefully am able to give those resources to you as well, or at least that's what I hope to do. Anyways, thanks for watching. We'll talk again soon.